Lindsay Bruce, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
And I was saying to you before we hit record, I was looking at your background and your story, and I don't think there's many people I'd rather have a conversation with that can really speak to the audience and kind of some of the wants and desires that they've got. And I've only ever interviewed one other person out of the 150 odd episodes that has served in the military, but I'm somebody that has a tremendous respect for it. But I also have like a bit of a thirst to understand a little bit more about it. And I guess as somebody that went into the military at such a young age, what role did your upbringing play in you always wanting to maybe be part of the military?
I mean, I come from quite a strong family background of military personnel anyway. So I was the youngest of four, one sister, two brothers. And my dad was in the military before his two brothers were in the military. So we do have this history of, that being the pattern. And I would say that my biggest influences were my two older brothers at that time. And, I did the army cadets and all that sort of stuff as a bit of a pastime when I was a teenager. But when you've got that living proof of someone or a couple of people being successful that it gives you that belief that it's possible, So I suppose it's like that vicarious learning element of learning through someone else. So they'd come home and leave and they would have more money, they would have a bit of status. And as a young guy, that seems quite cool. So
Yeah,
I would
definitely.
say that was my biggest driving force at that point, yeah.
And where did you grow up, Lindsay? I know you've got a bit of a varied background in terms of you moved a little bit, but always quite far up
I'm
north.
not too much of a pikey, but I did live in a caravan once. That's true, but I'm not from the travelling community. But yeah, I grew up in Fort William. So my dad was still in the army when I was born for about a year. So he left in 78. I was born in 77 in Edinburgh, and then we moved to Fort William. And I was brought up in Fort William, so I lived there for most of my life, apart from a very short spell in Glasgow at one point. Apart from that, my whole childhood was spent in Fort William in various locations.
And when you're growing up in that kind of area, and your brothers, like you say, they're a little bit older than you, they're coming back with status. Is that what kind of turns your head towards like, when I leave this town, I want to go into the military? Is that the kind of main route out of maybe living rurally?
It's one of those situations where you have options. Obviously, every stage of life you have options, and depending on what's going on in your life, what influence you've had, the upbringing you've had, the environment you've been around, will heavily dictate what you do. And it's an individual mindset thing. So some people don't have the inclination or the aspirations to go and travel or move out of their hometown. You get the people who have stayed there. I've got friends who have stayed there their whole lives who are very happy and successful. For me, in my personality, that was never something I wanted to do. I always had that itch to get out of it. But also, for me, I mean, when you look at the basic human needs structure of what we want, I think I missed the significance element from school, because I had a very bad experience in school academically. So socially it was fine. I had good friends. I was fairly popular. My circle of friends, I didn't have a problem in that sense. I was always a very social character, but when it came to the academia of school, I really struggled because of attention deficit. So I just didn't really quite fit that model. Therefore, the experience as a whole was very negative for the most part. So for me, I think having done really badly at school, not really going to school for the last couple of years that much at all, that just induced this desire to do something completely different. And I think I just had to get away from that environment, because there was a lot of negative baggage that I had having grown up with that experience, that I just wanted to achieve something that could then give me that level of self-worth and significance for myself.
Can completely see that. What was the first steps to try and get into the military then? I know you mentioned your brothers were in the army.
Yeah, so again, I spoke about this actually a couple of weeks ago on a talk that I did for another coach, and I had a bad experience when I was about 15. I initially tried to join the junior leaders, which was like 50, I think you had to be 15 and a half, 15 years and 8 months, I think the age or the minimum age was. And when I tried to join the junior leaders, they had stopped it. So they said you have to wait till you're 17. So being at 15 and a half and keen to just get out and, go and earn money and travel and join the military, I then thought, okay, what do I do now? So I decided that I heard the Marines were taking people on still at a young age of 15 and a half. So I applied initially to join the Royal Marines. Those Royal Marine guys who I know, that people who maybe are unfamiliar with the story will just laugh at me after the story I'm going to tell you now. But because I struggled so much academically, written tests and things used to make me sweat. So when it came to applying for the Royal Marines, I did the application process, and there was no careers office in Fort William, so they used to run this initial interview at the job centre. So the local job centre in Fort William was where you conducted your entry test. It was a theory test. So me not being too bright at the time and just assuming, I turned up at the job centre wearing my tracksuit and having down the can of Red Bull,
ready to rumble, ready for the press ups and running.
I remember it distinctly, right? I passed by the shop and I thought, I'm going to get a can of Red Bull because that'll give me energy to do my press ups and pull ups. In my mind, I thought I was going to be physically tested. What I was thinking, I don't know, but I turned up at the job centre, and this older guy, he's probably only about 45 then, but to me then he seemed really old. And he said, "No," he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "You're supposed to dress in sort of smart clothing." I says, "Well, I'm ready for my fitness test." He says, "You don't do that today." He says, "That's going to be, if you pass this test, you go to the physical side of things." So anyway, that was a bit embarrassing. So I did the written test, feeling really uncertain about it. And long story short, I got to the end of it and I failed the maths element of the entry test, which was really embarrassing because I just didn't know how to do it. I didn't have any clue how to do certain types of maths. So I was told that I had to wait 12 months before I could go back, and I was devastated. That honestly, it was like my world was over at that moment in time.
It's that combination, Lindsay, of the army's been pushed back until you're 17, and then you're like, right, okay, I've got this other route in, but that's been kind of postponed as well. Very frustrating.
Yeah. And through my own doing, right? So I've got this level of regret that I should have tried at school when my mum was saying you need to go to school. I should have listened to her. I should have tried harder instead of being naive and thinking you just need to go out and work hard and earn money. So the aspiration was always there to do well, but I just didn't like school. So now this kind of bit me in the ass in this experience that I was facing. So whilst I was waiting for that period to elapse and go back when I was, probably 16 and a half, 17, both my brothers were home on leave. This is quite some time later. So I did a bit of time as an apprentice welder. I worked for a welding firm an engineering firm in Fort William. I loved that, but it was never going to be my long-term career. So I did that to sort of mark some time, enjoyed myself, got into training, got myself fit, and instilled a bit of patience in myself, but got me into the gym, and I was really keen with fitness and that. So coming up to the time when I was going to go to apply for the Marines again, I'd even done some maths and stuff to prepare for this time. And
you had a reason to do it now, Lindsay, so it probably encouraged you.
My brothers were like this, you're not going to the Marines, you're going to join the Royal Highland Fusiliers, you're going to join the infantry like us. And I thought, well, it seems pretty cool. They went to Germany as well. So they've been posted to Germany and they were telling me the stories of, you get tax-free cars, you get more money, you get overseas allowance. I thought, this seems brilliant. So they sold it to me, thankfully. So both of them took me up to the Army Careers Office in Inverness. And from that moment on, the rest was history, as they say.
Yeah, amazing. And I suppose that family influence, the only reason you would have joined the Marines was because it was a time thing. It wasn't a case of you really wanted to be in the Marines. You just wanted some sort of fulfillment and purpose at that stage of life.
Yeah, there's a bit of both. I mean, one part was that I just wanted to do something. That was a fast track to get away. But in some ways in my mind, I thought, well, I'd like to do something a bit different because I want to follow the trend of being in the military. But at that point, when you're young and you're 15 years old and you hear stories of other people and you believe everything that's told. And there was an element of joining the Marines. I thought that was a little bit more specialist at that time. It was either the parachute regiment or the Marines. And it wasn't it for any reason that was deep to me. I just picked one and went, yeah, that looks cool. I'll do that. And it was kind of, just winging it really. But I'm glad it never worked out now, obviously, because,
it would have radically changed the path. Yeah. I wonder where you would be if you'd got into the Marines, Lindsay.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe the same place.
That's true. You might have taken another turn. Did you take to like a duck to water? You were obviously so keen to get involved. How did it feel when you started?
Well, I mean, I joined the infantry. Now, the infantry entrance test is very different than the test for the Marines. It's slightly less academic, shall we say. It was, a monkey could pass it. But that's obviously just to get you in. So back then, I joined the army in 1994. And, at that point, it wasn't that difficult to get into the army. There wasn't the hoops you got to jump through these days, medically and all that. I mean, it's a bit of a rigmarole these days. It takes quite some time to get into the army or any of the services because of things like the medical checks and whatnot. And I was in there. I think I was in from the moment of application. Within about a month or 6 weeks maximum, I had done my pre-selection and I joined. But when I got there, thankfully, it was the army's a very practical experience. It's a very practical process in basic training. There is a level of academic work to do, but it's not exactly, you don't need to be able to, conduct perfect grammar or, do maths to any sort of complicated level. It was more just learning what you're taught and absorbing the information and then practically implementing that work in the field or in camp or wherever you are. So I did take to it like a duck to water. It was one of those experiences for me that when I got there and I started to implement and started to enjoy it, it was like the feedback I got quite quickly was that, holy shit, I'm actually quite good at this. I'm actually doing pretty well here. I was very fit. I was one of the fittest in my intake. I could always run. I was physically really fit. And when it came to the practical elements of admin or preparing kit, doing things like locker layouts and all that, I excelled in it and did really well as a result of that. So that was a good experience for me. Getting into the army was a really positive experience.
I think in stark contrast to school, it's given you a positive feedback loop for when you apply your effort, something good comes back. Whereas you were maybe sitting in class previously, like, I don't quite get this. Like, I need a little bit more time from the teacher, but you're not getting that. And when you apply yourself, you're like, oh, right, well, actually, I am good at this kind of stuff. And I feel like I belong here potentially as well, which is probably something that's very important for a lot of young men when they find purpose and they find fulfillment. It's coming from a place where, like, there's a positive feedback loop in terms of when I add this effort in, this positive outcome comes. When I apply myself better, when somebody teaches me to do something better, I do it again, and it improves my result from that as well. So I think there's a huge merit from the military in that perspective.
Absolutely. And I think when you look at something like attention deficit, ADHD, for example, right? When you look at something like ADHD or people with any sort of attention deficit, depending on which part of the spectrum they're on, the typical trend is that if you're not interested in something or if it just doesn't fit, you're nowhere. You drift, and you will show little interest, implement very little as a result of that. Therefore, the result will be reflective of that. But when you show interest in something or you're keen to do something, then you become obsessed by it. And that was what it was like for me. I'd become hyper obsessed with the things that I was good at. So there's a lot of this happens where someone's in the wrong job, someone doesn't enjoy their job, someone's unhappy in an area of their life. It's not that there's anything wrong with them. They just are probably doing the wrong thing. That's why they're unhappy. And most people that we know, not most people we know, I should say, but there's a lot of people out there at the moment or these days that are just stuck in jobs that they don't like, stuck in relationships they don't like. It's either the wrong person, the wrong fit for a company, the wrong skill set, whatever, right? But it's just a case of finding your thing. And for me, at that point, I realized then that from going from the bottom of the class and being the person that the teacher ended up just despising because I would never implement anything they would tell me, unless it was something to do with art or, woodwork or metalwork or technical drawing. I was very good at that, practical stuff. But when it comes to anything academic, I just drifted and I wasn't interested at that time for that model. Now, that doesn't mean to say I'm not interested in that now, because I love to read now, I love to write now, I love to do all these things now, but it's been through a different environment. I've done that. And then going from that, where you're essentially bottom of the class almost, to then being one of the top in the class in something else, you have that moment of realization that, you know what, that just wasn't the right fit. Same as relationships. You sometimes realize, that just wasn't the right fit. It just didn't work because of whatever reason between two people. And then something else does work. And then you realize then that it's just not everything has to fit together.
Yeah, it's a great comparison, isn't it? And like you were almost being measured by the wrong metrics at that point in time. Like we've all seen that meme, haven't we? Where it's like the fish would be deemed incompetent if it couldn't climb the tree, or whatever variation you've seen. And it's completely the case, because like you were sat in that classroom being like, right, okay, well, this isn't quite for me. But as soon as you were given like instruction and a purpose within the military, it was like, this is gonna be great for me. And you served 5 years within the Royal Highland Fusiliers. I've said that correctly.
Yeah, so that's so. Where are you from? Where are you from?
Bearsden, just outside Glasgow.
Right, so it's your local regiment, actually.
Oh, really?
It's
okay.
Glasgow regiment.
I was all restructured, hasn't it?
Say that again.
It's all restructured now, hasn't it? Because there's been a lot of changes.
Yeah, no, it's now Two Scots. It's called Two Scots now, but that was because of the restructuring of the Scottish battalions. But yeah, I mean, I was a Highlander essentially. I was from Fort William, so technically I shouldn't have joined the RHF, but it's because my dad was in the RHF. My two older brothers were in as well, so that was my given path, or my chosen path, so to speak.
Yeah, of course. Now 5 years within that, and then one of the main reasons that I've become aware of you, Lindsay, is that you were in the SAS. What prompts you during your infantry career to be like, right, okay, I want to make the step up and across towards what many of us from the outside world understand is like the best of the best when it comes to the military?
I think the seed was planted earlier than that, and it's quite funny because you know the whole situation when someone's 5, when a child is 5, you ask a 5-year-old what they want to be when they grow up, they'll tell you a superhero because they believe it's possible. You ask a 10-year-old what they want to be, they'll say something like a professional footballer because they still believe that's possible. At some point in time, the person gets old enough to the point where their limiting beliefs just take over. Now, a lot of that is just harsh reality. So you realize that superheroes are fiction. You realize that to be a professional footballer, maybe that's quite a slim chance that you'd have to go a certain path and do certain, be in certain environments and have certain opportunities to make that happen. So it's a very limited potential possibility. And then at some point down the line, people just want a job and they want to earn money to pay their bills. So you think, what happens in that period? So for me, I think, given the 5-year-old, the 10-year-old example of those two situations, when I was, I think I was probably about, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old, maybe, I forget, 8 or 9, maybe 10, and there's a famous film, a really old movie now called Who Dares Wins, with Lewis Collins. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen that.
It's a classic, right? It's really cheesy. But it's classic, right? And it's a really good film. I'd still watch it now. But as a young child and seeing it, because that was kind of like influenced by the Iranian embassy siege that was up in Nimrod, which was done by B Squadron, actually, my former squadron, back in 1980. And that was when the SAS hit the mainstream, because no one really knew much about them at that point, and it was literally national TV. We interrupt this program to let you know that a raid's going down in the Iranian embassy, because the World Snooker Championship was on at the time as well, and they cut that out to then show this news. So anyway, that was big news, obviously, and then this film then sort of was born out of that, I think, and when I watched that movie when I was a kid, I just thought, wow, that is like so cool. All these guys running around with respirators on, dressed in black, with the music and all that, flying in helis. I thought that was like gives me goosebumps thinking about it now, right? Because I remember how inspired I was back then. I just thought, wow. And then for Christmas that year, I got the Action Man. That was the SAS guy, Action Man. So that was kind of like the first seed. Then with the influence of my brothers being in the military as well, and my older brother, the oldest out of the two of them, he had gone for SAS selection a couple of times. When I had just joined the army, actually, I was a recruit, and he applied for the SAS and went on selection, but got quite badly injured and just couldn't continue. Unfortunately, because I always say he would have been a perfect fit for that, but what's for you won't go by you, and all the rest of it. So that was a heavily influence on me, because I used to idolize. I always idolized my older brothers, and the fact that he was going down that path, and I thought it was so cool. I always wanted to embody that same character and be like him.
It's so important to have role models, Lindsay, and I guess like your childhood role model of the SAS Action Man and the guys in Who Dares Wins the film, that kind of sows a seed that this is something I'd like to do. And I suppose during your 5 years with the infantry, you would be upskilling the whole time and getting better and becoming more competent and more of an elite soldier. And I guess when you look across and you think, well, actually, maybe I'm at a stage now where I would like to put myself into that environment. Is 5 years like a typical amount of time that somebody would serve before applying for the SAS, or is there a longer or a shorter timeline?
Yeah, I mean, technically speaking, it was only 4 years colour service. Colour service is like from an adult. So I joined at 17. Your time doesn't really start until you're 18, officially. So yeah, physically I'd done 5 years, but in essence, I'd only served 4 years that counted in my service. And I would say that back then, it's one of the saying, if not now, when, and if not me, who. Right, that stuck with me at a young age because I remember hearing that when I was quite young, and I had a lot of self-belief back then. Maybe not in some areas of life, but in general terms, I had this kind of almost ballsy mindset of, it's just thinking, fuck it, why not? Why not go for it? What have I got to lose? And I think one of the mistakes a lot of people made, there would be a lot of people out there serving in the military in various units that would be capable to join the special forces. The biggest mistake they make is they never decide to go for it. So it's really an application process, which is a big roadblock for that, because a lot of people build up this kind of reputation for themselves, only to then let the reputation get bigger than them, and then they fear they're going to lose that. So therefore, they don't take risks because they think their reputation or their image is going to be tarnished if they don't succeed. So they just stay safe and retreat into their comfort zone of, maybe I could, but I won't try.
There's lots of phrases going off in my head there, Lindsay, like playing not to win, but playing not to lose. And like, not that the SAS is a lottery, but if you don't buy a ticket, then you can't win the raffle. So Absolutely. By not putting yourself forward, then how would you ever know? And I suppose with your brother having gone for it twice, you said, then you know how difficult it is, and you know that there is life after not getting in as well, even though it maybe doesn't feel great. You can still move forward from there and still be respected. You don't lose all the credibility you built over 5 years or maybe longer for your brother.
No, there's no shame in it.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no shame in it. And the other thing as well, if I did have any limiting belief in that sense, he did inspire and encourage me around those years, because I remember when I was maybe questioning myself, I knew I was fit enough. I always felt I was fit enough physically, because everything I'd ever done in my army career, I'd always excelled at it. And I'd never struggled with anything when it comes to the physical side of things. So I thought, I know that I'm fit enough here. I know I can do it. It was the other aspects that were the unknown. But there was no one there to really tell me anything about that, because I didn't really know anyone in the SAS. I didn't know anyone in the SAS at all.
So how encouraging were your regiment for going forward for it, Lindsay?
How encouraging were they?
Yeah,
they were really good. I mean, and I think, in essence, I was the first guy to go through and get in. I was like the trailblazer of that whole thing, thankfully. And I always mention the Roger Bannister example of, he breaks a 4-minute mile, and then a year later, a few other people do it. I forget how many, but it was that belief through someone else that it's possible. And for me, I didn't have anything to lose, in my opinion. I hadn't built this amazing kind of potential SAS guy reputation. It kind of came out of the blue for me. But when I told my boss, I was actually serving in Kosovo at the time. I was on an operational tour, and I had applied to do SAS selection. And my company commander at the time was really supportive. He just thought it was a great thing. I think he just admired the fact that I was going for it, and he also was of the ilk that we need more people to go for it. Why are people not going forward? Because the odd person would go now and then. The person with the reputation, they would go, they would fail, they would come back, and then everyone else is going, well, if you can't do it, then I can't do it. Whereas it really, going back to the vicarious learning situation of, if he can do it, so can I. But I didn't have anyone that was an example of that for me. So I was that first guy. So for me, in my mind, I thought, right, if I go for this, Yeah, I could fail. I could get injured. I could just fail. I could get to the end. They might not want me, and I might come back. But if this happens, how fucking cool would that be? And in my mind, that was the inspiration I needed, because you can get injured, you can fail at anything at any point. You never know, but if you're also never going to know if you don't try. So at least if you go there and you realize that, you know what, I'm just not cut out of the cloth that they want, I'm not right for it, then at least I know now. I've sort of I can put closure on it, rather than wonder for the rest of my life, if I had gone for it, then would I have been able to do it?
Yeah, don't die wondering, and don't fear rejection. Rejection's a terrible thing in modern society because we're not very used to it. But I suppose by you putting yourself out there, you open yourself up to the possibility that it's not a success. But equally, you can go a second time, maybe even a third time for SAS selection. Is there a particular cutoff in terms of when you have to stop?
You can, if you fail, so on the it's called aptitude. So the hills phase, which is the first month, and they call that aptitude. So all they're looking for there is someone who can get from A to B in a certain time with a certain weight on the back. Yeah, they'll look at certain, but they will pick up an attitude, obviously, because they do, witness what you're doing. But most of it for the last couple of weeks is really self-motivated. Well, it's all self-motivated, but in the last couple of weeks, you're on your own a lot. Pretty much all the time, you're by yourself. So there's no one to really, crack the whip or to assess you in any way. You just have to get to checkpoints. So at that point, you are just doing the physical aspect of getting from A to B. So if you then don't make a checkpoint in time on test week, you can fail. You're allowed to get what they call red cards. So a red card is essentially a fail. You don't make the time. So I got a red card on day 2 of test week. Test week is 6 days long, 6 test marches plus the endurance march, which is 65 kilometers on the last challenge. And I'd got a red on day 2, I think it was. Day 3, I was very close as well. So my ass was twitching big time. I thought I was going to fail because I was suffering quite badly with Achilles tendonitis, and I just didn't really feel I was making the time up very easily. I felt really drained. So I had a lot of uncertainty going into that, the second part of that week. But you're allowed 1 red card. If you get a second red card, that's you failed. You can come back one more time then, and you can try again, same detail. Now, if you are medically withdrawn, it doesn't count as one of your chances. So I know someone in my selection that was on his 4th attempt, but it's because every time he was on it, he got injured. So by injury, it's not a fail because there's nothing you can do about that. You just been unfortunate. So they will invite you back because they want you in. They don't want you to fail. The idea of selection is they want people to join, but it's the case of the bar's set so high that they can't lower the bar in order to accommodate more people, obviously. So if you fail in any other part of that, so if you fail the jungle phase or combat and survival or any of the significant stages, any other point past the first month, you can't come back. So you only get 1 shot, really. So if you fail, you fail.
Yeah, no, it's a punishing environment, but like you say, the metrics in the bar can't be lowered to then let in a lower class of soldier just because you had a hard time in the jungle, for example.
There are different. Excuse me, but there are different situations. They will kind of tailor that to a point. So I have heard in the past. I do know a couple of people actually from past years that have maybe gone when they were very young, a bit like myself, and they get to the end of the jungle phase, and they might be 21 years old and just not know their ass from a hole in the wall at that point in life. And the DS might go, you know what, this lad's got potential, he just needs a bit more experience. He's a good lad, good attitude, he's kind of what we want, he's just not ready yet. So they might say to that guy, go away, come back in 2 years. Do a leadership course, come back, a bit more hair in your balls sort of thing. And then you come back, and then some guys get in because 1, they like the fact you come back after doing all that. And 2, you're probably more ready. So that does happen. So people can essentially fail, but it's more a case of, we like you, you're just not ready yet.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you, Lindsay, was, do you think failing through like an injury makes it harder psychologically to go back second time? Because in stark contrast to the Roger Bannister example you gave, where somebody's run the 4-minute mile and then people follow afterwards, if you yourself maybe drop out through like serious tendonitis or a broken leg or some of the other injuries that befall people during the process, do you think it's harder to pick yourself up and go again in a future year because you know what's coming?
Yeah, I think it would depend on the mechanism and the type of the injury, really. Depending how that play in your mind. I mean, I ruptured my bicep a few years ago in the gym, and for ages afterwards, I didn't even really pick anything up because I had that mental part of my, that psychological part of me was going, what if it happens again? Because you know how much you had to go through recovery wise to recover the injury, and that plays in your mind, So I guess that. And now it doesn't. For me, it doesn't now. So I think time is a healer in that sense. So if you had a serious tendon issue or you ruptured an ACL, broken a bone, then initially it's like you dread the thought of putting any pressure on it or doing anything. But as time goes on and you start to then implement a bit of rehab and then start to load it a bit more, and then all of a sudden it starts to feel like normal again, then you kind of forget about it. So I would say that it does depend on the nature of the injury and the mechanism of that injury, depend how it will play in your mind. So yeah, it could potentially, it just depends on the individual.
Of course. You mentioned the first part of the process was the aptitude test, which is the hills for a month. How much does the SAS process differ to maybe what the public are a bit more aware of now, because we see shows like SAS Who Dares Wins, which of course is just very much a glitzy oversight of what it looks like. How much does that differ from the reality of what you would go through, Lindsay?
Hugely. It's nothing like it is the reality. It just isn't anything like that. I've said this in every podcast I've been on. And that's not to take away from a TV show, because at the end of the day, what is the aim of that TV show? It's to entertain the people who are sat on the other side of the screen watching it through a lens, right? So you cannot take away the fact that, I mean, if your job or my job was in filmmaking or creating a TV show, you're going to make it as, what happens when Hollywood make a movie, it's based on a true story. They have to make it to the structure of a movie. It can never be as reality unfolds, because it just wouldn't make any logical sense, or wouldn't make very good watching this potentially. And so if it's a Hollywood movie, it has to have that same kind of pattern of sequence of events to then make it watchable for the viewer. So when it comes to a TV show, the idea is for the company making it to make money and to get the numbers watching it. So it heavily depends on bums on seats, people watching what they're making, right? So in order for that to happen, they have to make that, they have to massage that into a frame where it achieves that goal. And if they based it purely on reality, then they wouldn't be able to anyway, because the main difference here is you've got a bunch of people who have never, ever put on a pair of combats in their lives going to do this 1 week long physical challenge, right? That's purely based on physical and mental robustness and resilience and all the rest of it. And they do get beasted, right? Fair enough, they do. But they're like fish out of water, they just don't have a clue about anything to do with the military. Whereas the SAS, the selection process, is they take on trained soldiers that have completed X amount of years service. And the ones who typically get through are the ones from the infantry backgrounds, who are from a soldiering background, because that's really what it's all about, is being a soldier. So you've got highly trained soldiers, professional soldiers starting that course, whereby on a TV show, you've got a bunch of civilians or celebrities or whatever the case may be, just challenging themselves physically and mentally for a week. It couldn't be further from the truth. I always say as well, when it comes to the fact of how you're treated on selection, it's a very self-driven, self-motivated process. SAS selection is very much, it's a course that you turn up because you want to be there. No one forces you to be there. When you say you want to leave, no one forces you to try and stay. In fact, the opposite, they say, right, okay, pack your bags, you're off, never come back. They don't want the person who's going to say, I'm out of here, right? So to answer your question about how close is it, it is nothing like it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, that point you mentioned there about the DSs as well, like for television and for entertainment, as you mentioned, of course, they're shouting and encouraging or like berating somebody, whereas you were saying there, the DS might just be like, okay, well, that's you out. See you later.
No, it doesn't happen. I mean, Billy, who's on SAS Who Dares Wins, Mark Billingham. Billy is a friend of mine, and he was one of the directive staff in my selection. So he was one of the guys who took me through selection. He was a DS, right? And he was also, you know, one of my bosses at a part of my serving time in the squadron as well. We were the same squadron. And he's a great bloke. And I tell you, he's really authentic because he is like that. But the only thing that differentiates is that there is no real shouting on selection. You know, it's not really about that. But they have to do that for the TV show because it wouldn't be as watchable otherwise. So when it comes to, you know, the reality of SAS selection, you know, what's worse than being shouted at is doing something and then seeing a DS witnessing you doing something and then writing in a notebook and walking away from you. You know, that's like the psychological operations involved with that. Like, it's pure psyops. And then that plays in your mind. You think, oh shit, have I done something wrong?
Of course, you'd be questioning what's he written down there. It might even not be a note about you, but it might be.
Yeah, they play games, mind games. So it's more about testing your psyche, you know, testing what you can handle. And a lot of people get in their own heads. So I remember one guy, in fact, there was a guy who was on my selection who was what they call a retread, right? Retreads are people who have been through before and they're coming for the second time, right? And some of the retreads that you get through are like they know everything about every part of the course. They're the ones who try to advise everyone on which route to take the next day, and you know they try to be that sort of that oracle of advice and you know what to do in the course. Not all of them, but a lot of guys like that do, right? So there's one guy who was a retread, and he had gotten through to the endurance march on his first selection, and his head, he got inside his head, and he lost his fucking head a little bit, and got lost on the last leg. So he'd have passed the hills phase. He was in the last march, and he got lost. As a result of that, he failed. He got allowed to come back because I think it got put down to there's something medical involved with it. But when I spoke to him, he said his head just went. He got inside his own head. It was very dark. He was in the middle of this wooded area. Didn't know where he was going. Got physically lost. Didn't know where he was, and just finally found a checkpoint. And he was over the time and all the rest of it. So, but he got to come back. On the second attempt to come back, he passed the hills face. We got to the jungle. The first night in the jungle, he rapped. The first day, right? And you could see it.
Voluntary.
Yeah, it's voluntary, but you could see it in him because he came from a core background, which was like not an infantry background. So there's been physically fit. There's been physically fit on doing the hills phase. But then when you then have to start being a soldier, it takes skill. So they're looking for the basics at a very high standard. That's the baseline to be in the special forces. You need your skills and drills and your basic level of soldiering skills, your marksmanship, your shooting, your tactical awareness and ability. These are all the things that you have to have pretty shit hot, and you have to have them dialed into you do have to be good, right? And no uncertain terms, and that's heavily tested. Now, when someone then feels completely out of their depth, and that will get in their heads, because then at that point he just thought, I am fucking in too deep here. This is not me. I can't do this.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how somebody can go through such a hard physical experience, but then when the mental not torture or torment, but the mental pressure starts to come on, then that's when maybe that part of their makeup isn't quite there.
Yeah, because you go from having this criteria of here's where you start, here's where you need to be at this time, here's what you need to carry, here's the things that you're not allowed to do. You go from that very basic instruction of getting from A to B, then all of a sudden the DS go from being out here looking in to then being like here, and they're looking at every single given move. You know, if you don't do your pouch up, if you don't have enough cam cream on your face, if you don't have your mozzie repellent on in the jungle, if your weapon's found to be dirty, these little micro details of the drills that are necessary,
which are far more soldier orientated, Lindsay, as you've said, rather than the physical stuff.
And that's what you will fail on. They will fail you on these basic things. So the basics have to be dialed in to the highest standard.
For your own journey, Lindsay, going through the process, the hills, you get through that and you get into the jungle. What's your self-talk going into that? Because you've said there about your colleague that just couldn't quite handle it. What's going on inside your head?
I think with anything you're trying to achieve in any area of life, it has to come down to the level of drive that you get from, the why you're doing it, and the purpose and the why. The what and the why is really is a big thing. And then the how is kind of like just sort of laid out for you, but you just have to do the work. But when you've got a really big reason why, I know it's kind of cliche, but it really is like that. You have to have I mean, I know how hard it was to get through that course. And I would say that if I didn't want it enough, I probably wouldn't have passed. I would have found a way to get out of it, because I would have, maybe not, in fact, because being who I am, I would have probably seen it through to the end, but then maybe thought, you know what, this maybe isn't for me. I can understand why some of the guys don't succeed, and guys who just give up and voluntary withdraw because they just don't want it enough. So for me, my driver was the visualization process of almost like, and I talked about this last night actually on a live call to my guys. Visualization is such a powerful thing, and I used to use visualization at a young age when I didn't really. A lot of people do it. Kids will do it. They use visualization to imagine yourself being in a place already, even though you're not there yet. So for me, when I was on SAS selection, I would get inspiration from like the DS. You would kind of like look at them, especially as a young impressionable soldier. I would look at them like gods. I would look up to them and think, I would just love to be like that one day. These guys are fucking awesome. They are the creme de la creme, the best of the best. That's why they're doing this job. And you just idolize these people who are just super soldiers. And so for me, that gave me a massive inspiration. So in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm just going to pretend that I'm that person now. I'm going to pretend I'm in the SAS. I'm going to pretend that I'm striving to be that guy. That's my next point. So even though I was on selection, my next motivator really was thinking to myself, maybe one day I could be a DS, right? Thinking really far ahead and embodying that identity. And this is something I spoke about last night. When it comes to the process of doing what you do to get a result to then feel a certain way, it kind of has to be reverse engineered. So most people will do something because they either do feel or not, they don't feel like doing it. So why am I not motivated to go to the gym? I don't really feel like going to the gym. I'm not motivated. Well, if you're waiting for motivation all day long, you're never going to fucking get there, right? It's never going to show up when you're tired or when you're busy. So you have to, instead of going, right, my feelings are this, therefore this is the action I'll take, and therefore that's the identity that is a result of these two first parts. You need to flip that on its head and go, what is my identity? Therefore, what actions do I take with this identity? Therefore, what are my feelings if I do that? So what you do in the bit in the middle, the action stays the same. The feelings and identity just get swapped over.
I love that, Lindsay. Huge fan. And I think one of the biggest influences on me in the last few years has been James Clear's Atomic Habits. And he is very big on,
yeah, very good, yeah.
If my identity is, for example, somebody that always does the things that they said they were going to do, then I have to fulfill my habits in line with that and my behaviors. Otherwise, I'm a fraud and I'm not living my true identity that I've decided I've set out as. And I love the fact that you were in this challenging situation and you were like, not only do I want to be an SAS operative, I actually want to move forward to be a DS when I'm older as well. So I will live their values, I'll behave like them, and inevitably I will end up at that goal. So I think there's a huge amount to be said from maybe like seeking out these role models and visualizing what needs to be done in the gap in between and just relentlessly doing it.
Yeah, fill that gap and do it and make it a habit. And it has to start somewhere. You've got to realize as well, they started where I was. So you can relate to that because you've got people who have they've traveled that same path, and again, it's learning through someone else because you can identify with that. It's a bit like, if I spoke to a good friend of mine the other day who goes around and he talks to people who are on their basic training for the army, day 5 or something it is, and he says that the biggest relatability is when you, as an ex-SAS guy, you say to these young recruits that are just off Civvy Street that I was once sat where you were now. They can really relate to that. So it closes that gap and it humanizes the person that's giving the talk, and they go, the person's just like me. They live and they breathe and they piss the same piss and all the rest of it. It's like otherwise you don't identify with that, because before I went for SAS selection, I didn't know anyone in the SAS. You see, I hadn't really met anybody. In fact, I'd met one guy who was who did like a recruitment presentation when I was on a command course. But other than that, I had never really seen anyone in the SAS. I didn't really know anybody. And the first time that I witnessed someone who was in fact, I'll tell you who the first guy was. Remember on SAS Who Dares Wins Again, there was Mel Downs, the black guy that was on, not the big American guy, but the guy that was on. I think it was maybe a year ago, something like that.
Yep.
And Mel he's a good friend of mine as well. And he was the first ever SAS guy that I'd seen physically in life. And it was when I was down in Brecon doing a command course, and he was one of the DS. It was like an external posting down there, and he was like the embodiment of what you would think an SAS guy would look like. He was just like chiseled and he just looked the part, and he lived that part. He's an awesome bloke, and I've never ever seen someone as physically fit in my life. He was an absolute machine, and he demonstrated that down there, and everyone were just like, he's like a ghost guy. It's just like he's not even human. Doesn't even look. He's not the same as me. You kind of there's a separation there. You go, fuck, there's this guy who's just like cut from a different cloth. But then when you get to know the person, you realize they're actually just another human being who have just done certain things to get them where they are.
Exactly that. They've just gone through the process and followed the habits and the systems that they've decided to, and they've just happened to excel. And we're capable of that if we apply ourselves in the same way, albeit with slightly different levels of potential in different areas. It can happen. Take me back to the process then, Lindsay. You're in the jungle. What's coming next?
So when you pass, always remember, like you don't get told on selection. You don't get told there. In the jungle. So you go to Brunei and do the jungle phase, but you don't get told in country that if you've passed or not. You have to just wonder and just hope you've done enough. They don't tell you till you come back to Hereford. So you complete the whole jungle phase, which is 6 weeks, 6 or 7 weeks, I think it is, all in, and then you come back and you go away you don't go away. They tell you when you come back on the next. So you arrive back, and then the next day you go to the training squadron cinema room. We're sat in this big cinema training room, and it's a bit like remember like X Factor or whatever it was years ago. I used to get like 2 rooms. Yep. Right, and then one room would be all the people who weren't being accepted, and the other room would be all the people who were going through. And if the ones that weren't being accepted heard the cheers, then they'd know it was they were going to be the ones that weren't going through. But it's a bit like that. So you all go into the cinema, and then the training officer, the chief instructor comes in and he says, right, the following names go and see the training officer. And they start reading out a list of names. Now, when they're reading out the list of names, one is that all the names were always done alphabetically. Being Bruce, I was always quite near the front. There was the alphabetical factor, and then there was also the characters that were being read out. You get a feeling. If he's being missed and he's been called out, you know them by this point because you've been in the course with them for the last 3 months. Who's likely to get through? Who's likely not to get through? And when they start reading that list, and I think, right, they've passed B, and they're now calling out the people who are kind of like, who I would perceive as being the weaker members, then you start to get a bit of hope I'm right. And I always remember this day because I was absolutely shitting myself. So having been, because I'd heard all these stories about people being young and being told they have to come back in 2 years and all this sort of stuff, and also having been dug up on a few things on selection on the jungle phase and thinking, have I done enough? Have I got through? Not only that, there were a couple of people who had come up to me and said, because you have a bit of a piss up at the end. And some of the DS, admittedly, will be like giving someone the nod or the wink and going, "Yeah, don't worry, you're all right. And that's enough to go. You're getting through." So some people will know because they'll have been given a bit of a nod or a wink. I never got that. I never had a nod or a wink, so I was thinking, "Shit, I've not had a nod or a wink."
They kept you under suspense, Lindsay.
So the whole flight. I was so worried because I couldn't even eat, and I was on the flight back, and I was just constantly thinking about it. What am I going to do if I don't get in? They tell me I failed. Oh my God, what are people going to think about me? all these sorts of things go through my mind. And then finally, when we got to the point where we were being told, and I was sat there in the cinema, and this list of names get called out, and all these people are walking out, all these guys are walking out the cinema room to go to the training officer, and there were probably about 20 odd people left at this point. Bear in mind, there was probably like 250 to 300 people on day one. There were like 20 odd of us left in this room. Forget the exact number. And they said, look, right, I'm happy to tell you that all you guys have passed. And that moment is one of probably the best moment in my whole career, because there's not really a point after that you get the same sort of realization, because they term that as the hardcore element. Now, essentially, you're only halfway through, and there are other people did fail after that point, but it's not a lot. So you would expect people who get through the first 3 months to finish the whole course. So the last 3 months there's some important parts to fulfill in that, but that is the hardcore element that are left at the end of the jungle phase. And like I say, some people do drop off at certain stages, but it's unlikely. Now, when you get told that is like the real hurdle, because after that point, when you get badged, before you get badged, you know you've passed. So you know weeks in advance that you just have to do the work and turn up, and there's a few things you have to do at the end of the course, but it's not like you get to the end and then get told, you've passed. It's just a formality. So that was the most significant moment in that whole process for me, because I was just on cloud. It was unbelievable,
I can only imagine what's going on inside your head when you're waiting for the B's to finish, and you're thinking like the guys that begin with A, you were thinking, well, I was better than him, and he actually had a few problems in the jungle, so maybe I've made it.
And not only that, there was a realization at that point as well that even if it didn't go any further, I had done what no one else had done. I'd gone further than no one else had in the past. So for me, that was a massive win. So at this point, I'm the first person to pass the jungle on SAS selection, like, ever, from my unit.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that in terms of being a trailblazer and setting an example. What were some of the places that you end up serving when you were in the SAS, Lindsay?
Typical places, Iraq and Afghanistan mainly.
I was going to say, based on your timeline, you're right in the middle of those quite significant wars for the UK.
Yeah, obviously other places like Northern Ireland, Bosnia. I've been to Kosovo before, but I didn't go to Kosovo with the regiment. That was just something I did when I was in the infantry. But yeah, namely, Afghanistan and Iraq multiple times during my service, and also when I left as well.
Oh, you went back from because I was going to ask you what you did post-military. It was like private security, wasn't it?
Yeah, so that was a bit of a means to an end for me, because the only reason I did private security was because I had to earn money, because I wanted to start a business. So that was my sort of my cash cow for building up the finances I needed to open my first business, which is my first gym, obviously. So yeah, I mean, private security was okay, it was good, but it was always a means to an end for me.
What were the careers that you looked at in the civilian world and thought, I can apply myself there?
I focused on one thing. I went all in fitness. I did. I made that non-negotiable for me. So, like anything I've done. So when I joined the SAS, I made that. I said, I honestly believe that if I hadn't gone into the SAS, I'd have left the army, because I wasn't really. I don't think I was really cut out for the infantry life long term, because I had my way that I thought things should be done. I didn't like a lot of the methods that they used to treat people, but looking back now, they have to. So you get far more respect when you join the SAS. You're treated like a human being. You're treated like an adult. It's first name terms with everybody, including the commanding officer. It's quite a thing. It's kind of hard to get your head around as a young soldier.
Like a flatter structure than the army, which is more hierarchical.
Obviously, there's a rank structure, but it's what's termed as a classless society. So no one thinks they're a better human being than someone else. It's about everyone treats each other with respect. So you're treated like an adult. So I went from being this young soldier who has been thrown bullshit at all the time as a young junior NCO, getting told that you can't wear non-issued boots, because even though the boots that you buy with your own money are more comfortable, someone comes up and says you can't wear them. You've got to wear issued boots only, even though you're in the field. The things that there was no autonomy. That's what I didn't like about the infantry, that it lacked autonomy. But at the same time, I understand why it's like that, because you don't have that same caliber of person across the board. So you have to have stricter rules in place. It has to be that way. Otherwise, it just wouldn't work. So it's a tightly run ship for a reason. But you join the SAS and everyone's self-disciplined. Everyone's come through the same process. So everyone knows that everyone that's next to them has done the same things as they've done. They've had to be of a certain standard. Therefore, they've earned that respect.
That is a big leveler, isn't it? Like that reassurance that somebody's cut from the same cloth as you are, or at least pushed themselves to the same extent that you have. Like there's an element of like, and I interviewed a gentleman who's an attachment specialist, but he spoke more about like how males and females bond, but also you bond like to the same sex in terms of like closeness as well. And vasopressin is one of the chemicals that's released because you go through a shared struggle together. And people like you'll probably meet up with guys that you went through the SAS process with and you haven't seen them for 10, 15 years, however long it's been. And you will still be like the tightest of tight guys together because you know exactly what he's like and you've been through the same shit.
Yeah, you understand each other, right? You get each other. You're tuned in. You're in the same frequency. And it's true. Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit like friends. You don't see that friend for 20 years and then all of a sudden it's like time has just done that. And it's like you've seen him 2 days ago. But yes, so anyway, as far as career goes, I mean, I went all in on. I left the military because I wanted to go into fitness. I wanted to go into the gym business because I was obsessed with training, and I loved it. It was a passion. So I thought I actually want to do something I'm really passionate about, and just have a job essentially that I just don't see as work. I just love it. So I was all about the big fulfillment side of things, and also at a point in my career where it was going to be. The next stage would have been senior rank, and there's a certain point in your career where it goes from being what you initially joined for to then being more political, more or less by way of the camaraderie side of things, because you get to a certain level. Obviously, you then got to start your circle becomes smaller. You don't do all the jobs that you did as a trooper or as a junior NCO. You're not like the first guy in the door or part of a 4-man team anymore. That's something someone else that's younger does. So for me, I again, the foresight kicked in, and I would look at people and think to myself, do I really want to be sat in an office? If I do my whole career in the SAS, do I really want to be sat in an office job, pushing a pen? Not really.
It's moving away from the stuff that you care about.
No, it was a pivotal point for me. I'm a practical person, and I suppose there's a lot of the thought of that. It daunted me as well, because that wasn't typically what I thought I was good at. So I thought, if I get to that point in my career where I've kind of maybe reached my ceiling, and because I'm not allowed to do the things that I'm perceivably good at, am I going to be any good at managing people from an office? It scared me. And not in a way that it scared me to then take action. It just it drove me away from it. So for me, that was a pivotal point, and I thought, I'm just going to make a move. And I'm a strong believer in if something doesn't feel completely tuned in to you anymore, then you got to make that call, but you got to go all in.
You have really high levels of self-awareness, Lindsay, and like even mentioning that you were using visualization techniques in the jungle when long before that was popular.
It's always been there. It's always been there. It's not black art. It's just that you know the science of it more when you learn about it. Lots of things. But it's a bit like when we make decisions. We make decisions based on pleasure and pain. You might not know the theory or the science behind that, but we do it anyway. And most things we do naturally. We just learn more about it as we get older and more experienced. But yeah, I didn't really want to do any other career, so to speak. I mean, that's changed along the way as well. Obviously, what I do now is different to what I did then. That's evolved. But
we're always evolving as people, though, Lindsay. And I suppose you going through different challenges and like maybe ticking that box of I wanted to own a gym, so I owned the gym and I built that up, and now I want to work with men on becoming like the modern warrior project. I think it's the tagline, isn't it? So like that. What we want is always evolving, and in 20 years' time, there might be something else that you're like, you know what, I really want to turn my hand to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course it will be. But you got to do it till it doesn't feel right anymore. But that's about, they say, self-awareness. Self-awareness and the fact that you identify that you might not be getting the same fulfillment. It's a bit like in a completely different field. I listened to a podcast the other day with Dorian Yates, the former Mr Olympia champion, and 6 times Mr Olympia. He lived and breathed like a bloody cyborg, like a robot for years on end, like his life depended on it. But he said in his last prepping for his last Olympia title, he didn't have the drive to go to the gym anymore. He didn't have that same passion for it, and it started to feel like a job. And he got out of that. He made a decision there to retire at that moment and look at other things, because it didn't have that same. It wasn't firing him up as much as it used to. And I think it's about realizing at a point in time when something is at that place, that it's a good thing, because it's a sign that something has to then change. Changes have to be made all the time in life, and it's just a case of knowing when and what to do.
Agreed. You've done a lot of self-development work since leaving the military. I know you did your NLP course. What did you learn from that?
That was one of the coaching courses I've done over the years. I mean, that was just one element of coaching, obviously. NLP for me, again, there's various elements to NLP. So typically when you do NLP, it encompasses NLP, timeline therapy, and hypnotherapy. And you take from that what you think is going to be useful for you. So if you go and do a course and you get taught several things, a couple of the things you might go, you know what, I actually don't really relate to that too much. I don't really enjoy that. I don't like it. So you leave it. And then if there's enough curiosity there and you think maybe I could like it, then you delve into it. But there'll be other things that just stand out and you go, I really like that. I'm going to go all in that instead. So for me, NLP, NLP is a great skill to have, because it makes you very, very aware of human behavior, why people do the things that they do. At the same time, there are certain elements of NLP I just didn't like. I just didn't get on with it. Maybe that's because I just didn't lean into the process enough to want to be really good at NLP and nothing else. But for me, it was always developing a skill so that I could extract bits from it to then utilize into the way that I would normally coach, which is obviously very holistically. I didn't really ever want to be one of those people who is, hi, my name is Lindsay Bruce, I'm an NLP practitioner, and identifies just that. And I do hypnotherapy and sit in an office and do NLP with people. It was always it was something to be improving my communication skills as well, because it's really all about communication. NLP.
It's just one thread.
Sorry?
Yeah, it's just one thread to multiple that you wanted to be able to offer.
It's great for that. It's great for things if you work in sales. It's great if you work in any sort of social environment. It's about it's all about improving levels of communication with yourself and with others, and it can be beneficial for many things. I would recommend that anyone does NLP, even if they're never going to use it to coach clients. It's just cool stuff to know.
Better understanding yourself and those around you is absolutely vital. One of the other last areas I want to ask you around, Lindsay, was with regards to some of the other self-development stuff you've done. I know you attended a couple of Tony Robbins events in the past.
Yeah, I used to work
what was that like?
Yeah. So I did. I worked at a load of Tony Robbins events. I went to several of his events. I did an event called Date with Destiny. It's the best event that Tony Robbins does. It's the most potent event that he does. It's very expensive to go there. It's very intense, but one of the best investments I've ever made, I would say. Going to that event at the time that I did it as well, it was very, very well received by me, because I was going through quite a tough time at that point. And it sort of, it really helped undo a lot of untidy knots and then, lace it back up in a tidy fashion again. And it reframed me at a point in time where I thought I was crumbling, in all honesty. Having the resilient mindset that I know I have, we all face challenging times, and depending on what that challenge is, depends on how we respond to it. But I was at a point in time where I was heavily into the whole Tony Robbins world, and I had booked to go in this event, which was in America. And when I left, I was at a point where there was a load of stuff in my life just wasn't going very well at the time, and I felt like I was losing control. Probably for the first time, I would say, ever, that I actually felt like the house of cards was going to collapse. And when I attended that event, it changed the game for me. It was like a rewire, and I came back a completely different person. So yeah, I mean,
what were some of the things that you rewired, do you think?
I think there's a lot of for me, I would say there was a lot of trauma still within me that I had to sort of accept, because I had always been of the mindset of, you know, just kind of bottle it up and just everything be okay, just keep soldiering on. That'll work to a point, but everything has a breaking strain. And I would say that not only the things that were consciously, evidently going wrong in life at the time, or not going the best, or the things that were causing me a lot of stress, there was a combination of those things plus subconscious factors from maybe, you know, a long time ago that were still sort of simmering in there,
lingering. Yeah.
So when you've got a lot of shit to deal with, it you feel that you just need to purge your system. And honestly, I walked away from that. It's kind of hard to put into words how you feel, because you walk away feeling lighter mentally and physically. You feel like you're floating almost, like you could levitate. And I know that sounds weird, but it's because you carry so much stress within your body that if you don't ever purge it, and if you don't learn ways to exercise that and get it out, it will just continue to build up and manifest, and that ends up being the person you are. So there were certain things that were evident physically for me around that time. I remember before that event, and for years and years, obviously I had done all these things in my life, and I'd almost like embraced stress. I always went towards more. So, you know, that expression of don't bite off more than you can chew, but if you are, then bite off more than you can chew, then just chew a lot harder. Right? So I was chewing like fuck, right? And I'd got used to that. I'd get used to that as a pattern in my life. I just almost like, I love the challenge of certain things, the uncertainty that brought to then bring the best out of me, but it was highly stressful. And a lot of entrepreneurs can probably relate to that. But I didn't have a way of purging the system. So I was highly stressed, and I noticed that I was getting physically quite ill. You know, on a regular basis, I was getting a lot of headaches. My eyes were always going really bloodshot, like it would change. But I always remember that this thing that I had for a couple of years, my eye was going, it would go inflamed, like just out of the blue. It was like pressure, like a tension headache, but then my eye would go like bloodshot red, and it would swell up to the point when I went to the eye hospital, got my eyes looked at, and said, "There's nothing physically wrong with your eyes. It's obviously referred from somewhere else. Are you stressed?" And I was like, "I'm not stressed." You know, I was, but I just didn't want to admit it. And I was getting colds. I would get colds quite a lot. I would catch anything that was going around, and I just felt quite, you know, physically quite fragile at some point. And run down. Anyway, I went on this 6-day experience, and you do a lot of meditation, a lot of submersive experiences. It's obviously all coached and controlled, and it was phenomenal. And you know, I always found it quite hard to get my emotions out, so I was never someone who would cry very easily. I remember when my mum and dad both passed away several years ago, and I always remember particularly when my dad died, it was like, it's almost like I found it hard to get my emotion out. I always remember that as an experience, that I held it all together for the sake of everyone else. And I almost like, I felt like I couldn't really grieve properly. Same with my mum. I mean, that hit me hard, but you know, I still felt like I hadn't. And a good friend of mine, actually, I'll always remember her saying, she was a really close friend, and she was a client of mine, a bit older than me, very wise, very clever. And she said to me, I think personally, she says, you've never grieved properly for the things that have happened in your life. And I was in denial. I just thought, nah, I don't believe that. The ego just got in the way. I was like, nah, I don't believe that. It's just me. I'm more resilient. I'm just not someone who cries very often or at all, really. Couldn't remember the last time I cried. It was weird. Anyway, I go in this event, and I remember being sat there in this one particular exercise that we did, and it involved going back to your childhood. It gives me goosebumps thinking about it and talking about it now. And you go back to your childhood, and you dig deep, and you go through this journey where you embody your inner child again and all this sort of stuff, and it's really, really powerful. And I always remember I just sat there in fucking floods of tears, like uncontrollably, like just like it wasn't like I wasn't loud, ugly crying or anything like that. I just I remember like it makes me well up even thinking about it now. But I remember just the floods of tears coming out and feeling like it was almost like getting all this fucking bad energy out of me. And it happened several times during that event, and to the point where I was on the flight back and I was thinking about things and I would start crying.
Yeah.
And it was like that for a little while. It was almost like, like I'd sort of drained all the tears out of my system, but then it was still coming out. And it was a weird experience because when I finally got back home, I had this overwhelming sense of indestructibility. It was fucking weird because all the perceived problems that I had, all the things that were going essentially wrong in my life were still there, but my perception of them had completely transformed. It was incredible. It was a liberating experience, honestly.
It was like a lightning. Like you said there, you felt like you were floating after the event because so much of this weight had maybe left.
It's just gone, yeah. And the thing with the eyes and all that sort of stuff, the headaches, the colds. I mean, I had COVID twice, didn't really suffer from it at all. Apart from that, since that, this is no word touch wood. Since that event, I've never been ill.
It's crazy how mental pressure and trauma can manifest itself physically, as you were discussing there, with the headaches and the swelling of the eyes. And I know when I've come close to like burnout, when I've been pushing myself too hard, my corporate job and the projects that I do, like the podcast and the side, when there's just like no let up.
Yeah.
Like I start like the bags under my eyes get worse. Like obviously that's like a tiredness thing, but like my skin gets worse. My training is just so much worse. Like I'm never progressively overloading when I've got that much stress put on my mental self. So it's very, very interesting when you don't take a time to lighten the load, even if it's just a very short break or at least some sort of daily practice. Like for me, it's journaling or making sure I get my 8 to 9 hours sleep, just ticking those boxes and trying to let go of some of the pressure that's on yourself can be transformative. And you've taken that to a huge extent.
What do people do all the time? They make excuses as to why they don't get enough sleep, as to why they're too busy, as to why they then can't train. Because people, by and large, are disorganized. Now, I'm not the most organized person on the planet by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm a hell of a lot better than I was. And I'm a hell of a lot better than most people, I would say. A lot of people. But one thing I'm organized with, not just in a way that my to-do list and all that are better than anyone else. I mean, mentally, I'm organized. So it really comes down to how you stack things up in your mind, because everything has a meaning. So going back to the NLP thing, something I explain all the time to everyone coming on board. It's a very basic subject of the NLP communication model. You might have read into yourself, about how you filter information. So everything we do, it links directly to the whole identity thing versus action versus feelings. So the process is obviously when you have all this information around you, almost infinite amounts of information, either past and present or something you can find out. But there's an abundance of information that's available to us all the time, but we have to delete most of it. We delete most of it and then we generalize a massive part of it that's left, and then we're left with a little bit of conscious thought that are maybe a few things that we have in our mind consciously, but then that creates a narrative that gives us emotions, and then we have to give that some sort of meaning. So going back to the example of when I came back after being on a Tony Robbins event, and all my perceived problems were still there, but they meant something different to me because I'd reorganized that process of how I filtered the information, and the narrative changed. And the big thing is that your narrative is your movie. That's what's happening right now. What does it mean to you? And what are you going to do about it?
I absolutely love that, Lindsay. And I think the combination of your military experience plus all the self-development work you've done post, with obviously this base level of self-awareness that was kind of visible throughout your life, makes a deadly combination for somebody being so switched on to how they're feeling and how they're moving forward.
Yeah, and I think it's also having the desire to always improve as well. So that obviously comes through the whole intrinsic motivation thing of curiosity, passion, purpose, autonomy, and mastery. These 5 things that are really the drivers of intrinsic motivation. And it's a big part of what I do. And I think a big part of what most people should try to do, especially guys, is to learn how to exercise their ego. Because if there was one thing that held me back from anything in life, in adulthood, it is my ego. And I would say that is a big thing for everybody. Anyone who's watching this, I would say, you need to check yourself in with your ego, because if you make it your foe, not your friend, you will suffer. We need an ego to a point. You have to have an ego, but you just need to know how to manage it. And if you let it get in the way, then you're going to hold yourself back, and you'll never be where you want to be.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, Lindsay. What a note for us to wrap up on. I'm sure people have enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. And if they want to continue the conversation with you, where should they head towards?
Mainly my Instagram, really. I would say Instagram is the main channel that I communicate with everyone through, which seems to work. I am having a website built as well, but that's more of a private membership site. But that will have information how they can contact me and whatnot. But I would say if anyone wants to know more about me, head to Instagram at the Lindsay Bruce.
That's perfect, Lindsay.
And obviously that'll be tagged in this video somewhere on social media.
Yes, it'll be in the show notes below. Thank you so much for joining me, Lindsay, and thank you to you, the listener, as well. I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very